We import almost 232 million barrels of oil each year from around the world. That's 15% of the amount we export, and it's shocking. It shocked me when I saw these numbers. We import 381,000 barrels per day from the US, 70,000 barrels per day from Saudi Arabia, 63,000 barrels per day from Nigeria, 50,800 barrels per day from Iraq, and 32,000 barrels per day from Norway. Can you believe that? It's happening. Now, how many dollars worth of oil have we imported in the last 35 years? Anybody want to guess? Give me some numbers. How many since 1988? 200 billion? Trillions? We have imported over $600 billion in oil from other countries since 1988. 600 billion US dollars worth. Imagine what 600 billion USD or 830 billion in Canadian dollars added to our economy would look like. Not to mention 4 of the 5 countries we import from don't have production caps or industrial carbon taxes.
Absolutely, guys. That's the key. Those industrial caps, those carbon taxes, really what's hurting the Canadian competitiveness when it comes to the oil markets. But today is Wednesday, January 28th. Welcome to Canuck News. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. I have this article here that I want to discuss. I think it's very important. I think it's one in a series of this new Liberal government's attempts at creating this great political posturing with all of these supposed trade deals that they're trying to do. But what we're having is Canada's Energy Minister Tim Hodgkins just announced plans to boost trade with India. Obviously to reduce, you named it, the dependence on the U.S. The government says that 98% of our energy is going to the U.S., that this is a strategic blunder. And the media is framing this as economic nationalism. And, Canada is finally standing up, diversifying and building sovereignty. Yes. Let's keep pushing this narrative, guys. But when you actually look at what it would take to make this happen, it exposes how little sovereignty Canada actually has, at least economic sovereignty. Because we don't have the infrastructure to do this, guys. And even if we built it, the math doesn't solve U.S. dependence. This isn't economic nationalism that we're looking at, guys. It's rhetorical positioning for a domestic audience that wants to believe that Canada has more independence than it structurally does. And let's go through the article real quick here. So we go, Ottawa's plan to increase energy exports to India makes sense given how the South Asian country's massive population and rapid economic growth have boosted its demand for fossil fuels, analysts say. And so that, just saying this makes sense is a big lift, honestly, in and of itself, just because what makes sense? Exporting to a country that has needs? Sure. Of course, that makes sense. But making sense and having the infrastructure to do it are two completely different things. Hypothetically, it makes sense. Yes, sure. In reality, we'll dig into it a bit. It goes, Energy Minister Tim Hodgkins told the India Energy Week conference in Goa on Tuesday that Canada is looking to boost energy exports to India to diversify its customer base and cut dependence on supply to the U.S. And it goes, exporting 98% of Canadian energy to the U.S. is a strategic blunder, Mr. Hodgkins said. The fastest growing demand for energy in the world will be in India. Mr. Hodgkins, guys, I really have to stop here and kind of pick at this a bit, because he's saying 98% of 98% U.S. dependence is a strategic blunder. I actually agree to that to a certain degree, but the question is, what's your plan to change it? Because the infrastructure to export to India doesn't actually exist, guys. The current reality is that Canada sells 150,000 approximately barrels per day to India. It goes via the Gulf Coast, so the Gulf of America, recently renamed. And so one very large crude carrier ship per month, guys, that's it. So what we would need is we would need a deep water port that can handle these tankers, probably off the coast of you named it, Vancouver. Let's build a pipeline. Let's build that pipeline through BC, and then let's start shipping. Let's build that deep water port. Let's get that infrastructure. Oh no. First Nations. Oh no. There's a First Nations group that's not allowing us to build pipelines on our own land. And the article even admits this though. A new pipeline to a deep water port that can handle the VLCCs would open up India as a more accessible market for Canadian shores. Guys, what this means is we're exporting through American infrastructure. We have to send our oil, quite literally streamline it down the center of the U.S. to get to the Gulf, Coast, the Gulf of America, in order for us to even export it to Asia. We're literally, instead of going west, which would be much faster, honestly, for Canadian oil exports, we're beelining it down the center of the U.S. to get basically on the Atlantic Ocean. And then we have to curl it through Central America, through Nicaragua, to get into the Pacific Ocean. How little sense does this actually make, guys? So when Hodgkin says we need to reduce U.S. dependence, he's announcing it at a conference in India while our exports to India go through American ports, guys. Guys, this isn't a plan. This is just more aspirational talk coming from the Liberal government. And building a deep water port and pipeline is billions of dollars of investments, guys. This isn't, and it takes years of construction. This isn't something you just go ahead and do. The best thing that they could have done, if they were actually serious about this, is they would have said, hey guys, the great people of Canada, we need to diversify away from the US. Obviously, because we have all of this oil, we need to diversify. David E.B., too bad. This pipeline's happening. We're building this. We're building a deep water port. You can't really do anything about it. Too bad. You cut out U.S. reliance on exports to Asia, and you streamline everything. You cut down the carbon taxes and all of that, and you streamline that pipeline through BC, and you actually open that up as an avenue for sales. But there's no infrastructure plan, and there's no timeline. Where is the investment commitment? We have nothing. It's just Tim Hodgkins going around saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then you have a bunch of liberal bots on X commenting how the Carney government is doing all of these great things. Everything that has been said and done by this government, and I don't want to sound biased and bipartisan or partisan. It's not my intention at all. But everything has always just been rhetoric. The economic consequences of the moves that these guys are trying to do have never actually been explained to the Canadian public. Right? I just want to continue on here a bit. Susan Bell, Senior Vice President of Commodity Markets at Rystad Energy, said that exporting Canadian fossil fuels to India is definitely worth pursuing. The country already has a fairly large refining sector that processes roughly 6 million barrels a day of crude, and it has plans to grow its petrochemical sector, Ms. Bell said. So it's not just an opportunity for crude oil, it could also be an opportunity for naphtha and potentially even ethane, she said. Canada does sell crude to India, but at roughly 150,000 barrels a day. It's a sliver of the country's overall export market. The bulk of India's heavy crude imports come from Iraq and could reasonably be substituted with Canadian oil, Ms. Bell said. And so I find this a little funny, to be honest, substituting Iraqi oil with Canadian oil, because the Indians really care that much about being carbon competitive. We have great oil, as Carney said in his one speech. We have great oil. We're carbon competitive. Everybody wants that. No one cares about being carbon competitive. What is the thing that's worth pursuing here for Canadian oil? That's really what I want to understand. And kind of let's go through the math right now. The current state, as expressed in the article, is that Canada exports 98% of energy to the U.S. Canada sells 150,000 barrels a day to India, so a sliver as they call it, and India imports 6 million barrels per day total crude. The best case scenario, this is the way I see it. The best case scenario is that Canada can quadruple India exports, and it goes from 150,000 to 600,000 barrels per day. That's only a 10% of the total Indian crude imports. And it doesn't meaningfully reduce the 98% U.S. dependence. And why? Because Canada produces roughly 5 million barrels per day of oil, and we export 4 million barrels per day. And 98% of that, roughly 3.9 million barrels per day, goes to the U.S. So even if we sent 600,000 barrels per day to India instead, we're still sending 3.3 million barrels per day to the U.S. That's still 82% U.S. dependence, guys. And you can't diversify away from a market that takes 4 million barrels per day by finding a market that takes 600,000. That math doesn't work. It's not a bad thing to do. Don't get me wrong. We should be diversifying. But that just means that India's, from a math perspective in the export market, that just means that India is always going to be a junior partner for our energy exports. And we should do it because we're probably going to get a better market price for our oil than we're getting with the US. Sure, that's fine. Maybe though, because we might also ask for more money because we're trying to be carbon competitive, right? And the Iraqis aren't. Why would, like, here's the other question. Why would India want to buy more expensive Canadian oil that's carbon competitive, who cares, than Iraqi oil, that's definitely not carbon competitive, or Russian oil that the Indians have been buying and reselling to the Europeans recently since the conflict started in Ukraine. And all of this in this article and that statement that Susan Bell said, it assumes that we're going to build this infrastructure, or that we have the infrastructure, but we don't. We don't. India wants to replace Iraqi heavy crude with Canadian. Unlikely, but sure, maybe to a certain degree. And we can compete on price with the Middle Eastern producers, and that is definitely not clear, right? And so when Hodgkin says 98% U.S. dependence is a strategic blunder, he's right to a degree. He's right to a degree, but the solution he's announcing doesn't actually solve it, because you can't replace the U.S. market with the Indian market. Those volumes don't exist, and it's the answer is simple. The only country we border is the US. And so it makes sense that we have this heavy trade with them. What doesn't make sense is that we've had a century to try and diversify our trade into different markets. Specifically, let's say for this energy sector, we could have built the pipelines to the west. We could have built the pipelines to the east. We could have supplied all of Canada with our own oil. But as you saw in the clip I showed with X, we're importing oil from Nigeria. We're importing oil from Saudi Arabia. But we have the second largest oil reserves in the world. So why haven't we built our own pipelines to connect the whole country with our own oil and just be oil independent completely from everybody? And then use those same pipelines to build the deepwater ports on the West Coast and on the East Coast. And then we can export to Asia and to Europe, to whomever needs it. We can sell it to, the King of England. We can support Mother England with a deepwater port in the East Coast, but we're not doing that, right? And we can't, and we could support the Asian markets with a deepwater port in Vancouver. We're not doing that either. No. We export our oil, beelining it down the entire length of the U.S., into the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, so the Gulf of America now, and then we're curling through the Caribbean and going to the Far East, guys. That is such a it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make, and they don't actually state any of these nuances. It's not even a nuance. It's just common sense. They quite literally avoid using common sense when it comes to when it comes to any of this in the article. Here we go. The Canadian crude that heads to India typically does so via the U.S. Gulf Coast at the rate of about one very large crude carrier ship a month, said Rory Johnston, an oil analyst with commodity context. A new pipeline to a deepwater port that can handle VLCCs would open up India as a more accessible market from Canadian shores, not just from the U.S. re-export market, he added. With oil demand from China set to plateau over the next couple of decades, India always comes up as the next big engine for global oil demand, Mr. Johnston said. I need to stop it right here because this article is just full of things that need to be addressed, right? What Hodkins is selling is essentially economic nationalism, and I love economic nationalism. I think if we're gonna preach independence, sovereignty of Canada, you have to be an economic nationalist. You just simply have to. And a certain amount of that economic nationalism does equate to diversification away from the U.S. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that the U.S. doesn't have to be our biggest trading partner and our biggest ally and all of that. Absolutely not. I think that the U.S. absolutely has to be all of those things. But we simply need to diversify because we can make just so much more money and we can be actual global players in different industries if we diversified. But we're not doing that. It's also marking India as a strategic market. India can never really be that big of a strategic market for Canada. And here's the first reality of the problem is the infrastructure. Canada, we don't have any of the infrastructure. We export all of our exports that go to India go through the U.S. Gulf Coast, the Gulf of America. We need new deep water ports plus pipelines. They said that in the article. We don't have that. There's a memorandum of understanding that was written. It doesn't mean shit for getting shovels in the ground. And there's just such a stink up about building a goddamn pipeline to the West Coast. That's Canada for you. That is quite literally Canada. And we need billions of dollars of investments that haven't been committed to actually build this as well. And that would just be years of construction. So this is like a brainstorming session, but all of the politicians are saying it out loud in official capacities in foreign countries, making it seem like it's something legitimate. And it's all that happens when you do that. From a foreign policy perspective, is Canada ends up looking like an unreliable partner. It talks the talk, but it can't walk the walk because we're too busy squabbling internally that we can't build goddamn infrastructure. And the second problem is the math doesn't actually solve the dependence. We went through the numbers. Even at the best case, even if we 4x the amount of exports we had with India, that would be 600,000 barrels per day. It would still leave 82% dependence on the U.S. market. What other market do we go after? That just means that we should be going after a lot more other Southeast Asian countries because they all have massive populations. Maybe we should do that. But we haven't been running around Southeast Asia trying to make those agreements. You just can't replace those 4 million barrels per day that the U.S. market's asking for. What we might run into, and why we should be kind of rushing this, is that the U.S. we're going to see what's going to be happening with the Venezuelan oil because Venezuelan oil is heavy crude, just like the Canadian oil sands. And so all this looks like is rhetorical positioning, guys. And it lets the government look like it's pursuing economic nationalism and reducing U.S. dependence without actually having to build the infrastructure or solve the structural problems that exist. It goes, even if Canada's energy sector wasn't dealing with damaging American trade policies, he said, we've already saturated the U.S. market. Ms. Bell said there is also opportunity for other projects such as liquefied natural gas, for which India imports about 5% of the world's supply. China's market is 3 times the size of India's in terms of LNG imports, but India's market is substantial, and there's no reason why we can't participate in that market, she said. Federal government data lists India as Canada's 7th largest goods and services trade partner, with mineral fuels and oils worth around $767 million, or 14.5% of total merchandise exports. Dinesh Patnaik, India's High Commissioner to Canada, said in an interview that there's a huge field of opportunity for more trade cooperation between the two countries, including energy, fertilizer, nuclear, and critical minerals. We want to tie up with everybody possible, especially countries like Canada, to be able to work out deals together. Sure, I mean, everybody's always going to want to have as much diversification as possible. That makes sense for India, right? But I want to stop here though as well, because this timeline just seems funny here. If you guys look at this, it goes, Carney does the China EV deal, Trump threatens 100% tariffs, and now we're suddenly aggressively pushing on India. Guys, it seems like they're scrambling instead of strategic planning, right? And what I see here is a broader pattern of the Carney government. The left and the Carney government are selling economic nationalism as a response to Trump. The liberals are eating it up as if we have this strong economy, we have this strong leader. What their goal is to diversify this trade, to reduce the U.S. dependence, and kind of build this Canadian sovereignty. At least that's their stated goal. But when you examine what it would actually take, China has a 6.1% tariff on EVs that China couldn't get through Mexico. Then the lecture at Davos equals Trump 100% tariffs. India announces energy diversification without infrastructure. The math doesn't replace U.S. volumes, guys. It's rhetorical positioning. It's always rhetorical positioning. And the pattern is the same. All you get is these big announcements about sovereignty and diversification. There's no structural foundation to execute on. And when the U.S. pushes back, Canada just discovers it doesn't have the leverage that it claimed it did. And that's my actual. I have a serious problem with all of this, guys, when it comes to this government's the way they position everything. It drives me nuts. But this is why this matters to us, to Canadians, guys. If you work in energy, you should want genuine diversification. And 98% U.S. dependence is a strategic vulnerability. Hodgkins is right about that. You don't have to be a genius to know that. It's common sense. But wanting it and having the infrastructure to achieve it are completely two different things. The stink up that happened from the memorandum of understanding for the pipeline to the West, it just goes to show you how little control we have over moving strategically quickly in Canada for strategic assets like oil. If the government is announcing India exports without committing to the port and pipeline infrastructure required, they can't be serious. And if you're hearing economic nationalism rhetoric on social media and thinking Canada is finally standing up to the US and look at what's actually being built, guys, not what's being announced. What's being built is nothing. Because rhetoric without infrastructure is just performance, guys. And performance doesn't reduce dependence. That's all I have for you guys today. Hope you liked today's episode. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is Canuck News. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Captain say. Kick your ass all hockey season, Mounties be riding horses, Yeah.